Hey there, Raelan here. I am excited, as always. I have another chronic fatigue syndrome full recovery story to share. I just finished chatting with Terese Millhouse. She is in Hobart, Tasmania, in Australia, and she, after living with this illness for quite a few years, was able to fully recover. And when she first started telling her story, I was thinking, it kind of sounds like we're hearing your husband's story more than your story. But I quickly came to realize, and it's an important message, I think, how the trauma of what happens to the people around us really can impact our health and our own experience and recovery in life. So it's, at times, definitely a heartbreaking story, but also a really inspiring one. And she shares some great insights, not only on the things that helped her to fully get past this, and she shares not only the insights and information around the things that helped her to finally fully recover and fully get past this, but she also talks about what this was like facing this as a parent, and suggestions and tips she has for other parents out there. And like many people who have come through this, she is now passionate about helping other people who are facing not only ME/CFS, but all sorts of chronic health conditions, and has become a natural wellness coach herself. So she's a beautiful person. She's got an inspiring story, and I hope you appreciate hearing about it as much as I did. Hey, Terese, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Raelan. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're having a little laugh here because this is our second take. The first time I did it, I can't say the name. Is she going to think I'm talking to her again?
Yes.
My computer Apple assistant that starts with an S followed by an IRI thought I was talking to her and started answering my questions that were meant for Terese.
She wants
Anyways.
to butt in all the time.
Yeah. Technology. But anyways, why don't we just dive right in? Can you tell us a bit, about your journey, about your story, about, what life was like before you were unwell and what happened and what that looked like for you?
Well, yes. I guess I was your typical 20, 30-year-old. I loved sport. I was big tennis, badminton, played golf. I was singing, writing songs. I loved fishing. We went camping. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in my late teens, early 20s, and that was probably, in hindsight, where potentially things started to deteriorate a little bit in my health. But I started to take some medication that I was told I'd need to be on for the rest of my life, and at that point it was devastating, but I thought, oh, okay, if that's what needs to happen. And so that was fine, everything was balanced out. And then I met my beautiful late husband, Matthew, in our early 20s, and that's probably where the start of the story comes from, because he's very much involved in my chronic fatigue recovery story. I guess where to start. It was a bit of a whirlwind romance. We were introduced from mutual friends, and we actually started to see each other 6 weeks before he was due to join the army in Australia. And we thought we would just have a bit of fun, even though we knew he would be moving interstate, and just enjoy each other's company. And it ended up being something that we didn't want to finish or say goodbye to. So we had a pretty amazing long distance relationship for a year and a half. I moved up to Darwin in northern Australia to be with him, and he joined the cavalry regiment of the Australian Army, so he was a driver of the light armoured vehicles, and so they were stationed in Darwin. So this was around the time that the war with Iraq, the second Gulf War, was on, and so there was a lot of training and a lot of speculation around whether he would be deployed. So I still moved up there, but 3 months later he was deployed to go to Baghdad in Iraq. Oh. And so that was really difficult, although I was still quite well and healthy and outgoing, and I made friends and I found a job and I worked, and a beautiful bunch of girls who I am still really, really close with today, whose partners were also overseas with Matthew. And literally a month after he went to Baghdad, his vehicle convoy was targeted with a car bomb explosion. and there were injuries. It was actually the first attack on Australian soldiers, which was pretty huge for us. It's quite a big thing in America, but this is, it was quite a huge thing for us back then. And no one really knew. We knew that it had happened, but we didn't know if our boys were involved in it or not. And we did get a phone call to say that our boys were okay, which was wonderful, but there were some injuries. So Matthew seemed relatively unscathed at that point. His vehicle was knocked forward and he was knocked unconscious for moments, but from that point on he just went about being the medic on duty and went to treat the injured, so he seemed fine, and he went on to finish his tour of Iraq and did another tour after that in 2005, 2006. So, we got engaged while we were in Darwin, and we moved back down to Hobart in Tasmania, where we're both from. And it was just a really, really happy time. But it did start to get difficult around the time we were wanting to organise our wedding and get married. And that process seemed really unusual because everything became an anxiety response with Matthew. It was a lot of unreasonable anxieties around who was coming to the wedding and how many we had, and that happens, I get that, and everyone goes through that, but this was not his normal personality that I was used to. And so the signs of post-traumatic stress disorder were starting to show, and he did end up being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He was also diagnosed with alcohol abuse and depression and anxiety. So throughout that time it was very stressful, very ongoing stress, dealing with and looking after Matthew, who was not himself. He was not his regular, normal, happy self. We ended up having a beautiful baby girl, and it was probably from there that my health continued to deteriorate after having Eleanor, our baby girl, in 2010. And Matthew's health also started to deteriorate a bit more, where he found it difficult to even look after Eleanor. The anxiety was huge. He would be paranoid around, her just falling over in the street, and there was a lot of paranoia around, garbage bins in the street and parked cars. But he ended up starting to have a bit of a decline in his speech, and we were trying to work out if that was a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, because it was unusual. He was starting to stutter in his speech and become harder to understand. And so throughout this time of this unusual behaviour, and I felt like I was losing my husband, the man I fell in love with and married. He was becoming a shadow of his former self. And we also had a young baby. And I had my year off of maternity leave. I was very lucky to have that time off. And I went back 3 days a week, but I was never able to go back full time after that, because Matthew continued to deteriorate. He started to fall over and trip regularly and hurt himself. He started to forget and find it difficult to find things around the house. He had unusual behaviours in the things that he didn't seem to have a filter in what he was saying, any judgment, and his speech became worse. And so I was living with someone who I really couldn't recognise, and it was just something that I will never really be able to verbalise what that was like. And just thinking about it, I do so well, but yeah, thinking about those ridiculously crazy, stressful times. So I started to become unwell over this period when my husband was becoming unwell with his unusual behaviour. I was becoming more sick with viruses. I was tired. I struggled to get to work. I ended up having to reduce my hours to 2 days a week. And while we were trying to work out what was going on, our marriage was suffering because it was just really, really so difficult. And it wasn't until I ended up being on antidepressants myself. It wasn't until about May 2013 that we ended up separating for a period of time, because I felt like there was something huge going on, but I was a bit of a zombie and I needed to help Matthew, but we had such a disconnect that I needed to have a break and some space so that then I could deal with whatever we were dealing with Matthew. And he progressively got worse while we got some testing for him done. We went to a memory clinic and he had neuropsychological testing. And over that period, I became progressively worse until I had a breakdown, a physical and mental breakdown. And I rang my mum, who lives in Perth in Western Australia, and she had to come over and look after Eleanor and Matthew. And Matthew had already spent a couple of periods of time seeking help himself for his mental issues. So it wasn't without, it wasn't just a sudden decision. This was a lot of work of marriage counselling and both of us trying to get help to survive. But when I had my breakdown, Mum said that she would come over and help with Eleanor and with Matthew. And he was still working at this point, so I ended up having a stay in a health clinic for about 4 weeks to work on my own mental health, my physical health. I went through a lot of counselling, a lot of programs and skills that I still utilise today, I've learned. And I came off Prozac medication, which was just terrible medication for me. I just felt like a robot when I was on it. And coming off it, I felt like I was feeling again, which helped me feel more alive and focused. But while I was in the clinic, we got an official diagnosis of Matthew's issues, which was something we couldn't really fathom. We actually thought he'd had a stroke at one point because of all of his symptoms. And it turned out that he had brain deterioration, which was synonymous with dementia. So he was only 33 years old.
Wow.
And we got this result of diagnosis of young onset dementia. And I had a feeling that we were leaning towards that, closest to the diagnosis, and I started to research and look it up, and I was just devastated because, interestingly enough, even though people are young, it's worse for them because for some reason it's more rapid than if you are older. So we were looking at a death sentence, which I don't think Matthew realised at the time. If he did, it was something that he wasn't able to register, and that was probably a blessing in disguise. So I actually never was able to go back to work after that point because I was then looking after Matthew full-time, trying to help care for him, make sure that he was in a safe and secure place, because we were still separated at that point, but my mum was able to go back home, and I was looking after Eleanor, and I had family and friends support, but I was never able to go back to work at that point. So it was it was a really, really crazy time. From around the time he was officially diagnosed, it was in 2 months that we needed to find him 24-hour high-level care in a nursing home, and which is for aged care, because there were no other facilities around that were able to support Matthew, because he was falling over all the time and he wouldn't have known what to do if there was a fire. And Eleanor was 3, so it was really tough. And so for me, just to give you this understanding and that background, that's where I progressively got worse, and it ended up being chronic fatigue syndrome. But it took 18 months of being really not well myself and dealing with everything else that was going on with Matthew's health and looking after my daughter. I had, all the blood tests done under the sun to work out why I was so tired all the time, why I was physically getting sick with viruses. They just say, oh, you've got another virus, sore throats, inflammation in my back. I would eat food and I would feel gross and bloated and disgusting, and just the fatigue, just the brain fog. It was hard enough to think about looking after myself, let alone my daughter, and everything that we needed to do for Matthew.
Wow, Terese, I am so sorry. I can't even begin to imagine what that was like to go through for any of you, and with a small child this whole time. I would think with everything that was happening with your husband, with your own health problems, did you find it hard to even really put the focus you needed on your health problems? Or what were you thinking? How much of your attention was going towards sort of fixing yourself when you had a small child and a struggling, very sick husband?
Interestingly, it was just going to the doctors to try and get constantly getting my thyroid levels checked as well, because they were up and down as well. I had that issue. It was just to get all of these tests done, iron, vitamin D, anything that could be contributing to this excess fatigue, because there was nothing coming up in blood tests. There were no signs that I had a terrible virus or anything like that. I just appeared. I just felt like I did. And it came down to adrenal fatigue, I think, at one point, which everyone was like, well, that completely makes sense because of what you're going through. Yeah. My mum had to come over. She moved over ended up being about 18 months so that she could help me with Eleanor, and Matthew was in the nursing home, but I needed to do everything around his care. And whenever I wasn't doing that, I was on the couch resting or in bed resting. I still had to look after myself as much as Mum helped me with Eleanor, and she helped when we went out on outings. We took Matthew out, and as he progressively got worse, he needed to use a walker, and it was constant. His behaviour was it could be quite aggressive, but then it could be also quite childlike, and trying to explain any new changes to him was really difficult. He was also stubborn, and he was, which is him generally, but he was losing his independence, He wasn't able to drive anymore around the time that he was officially diagnosed. He couldn't drive anymore. He had gun licenses from being part of the pistol club and in the army, and police had to come and take all of that away because he was not well enough to drive or to be safe. So, and then with the walker, and then a wheelchair. So all of these phases, it was another level of grief. So I was also dealing with constant grief. Yeah. When you lose someone, you grieve, and it does take a lot of time, but it was like we were just losing him every day.
Yeah. The reason I asked, because as I hear you tell your story, and this is completely understandable, but it seems like, because you were facing some serious health conditions yourself, but it feels like it's so far in the background. Like, it really feels like we're telling your husband's story because it was so powerful, and it makes sense that it just completely took over your life. But it doesn't sound like there was a lot of space for you to focus on your condition and your health.
I couldn't look after myself properly until he passed away. My health recovery journey happened after he passed away, so it was all through that story that caused the chronic fatigue, that constant stress over about a 5-year period it ended up being. And yeah, he passed away in August 2015. Eleanor was 5, And my mum stayed on for another 6 months after he passed away to help me with my grief and my recovery and to try and get myself back to some degree of independence. I didn't know who I was. I was Matthew's carer and I was his wife, and then I wasn't. There was a lot of sleeping. It was still not really able to focus on myself. It wasn't until I ended up getting an official diagnosis from my GP saying, look, there's nothing else that it can be. We've tested everything under the sun. I wasn't celiac or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And but I had this for long enough for her to say this is chronic fatigue. And at that point I was just like, I need to, if there's nothing else you can do, is there someone else that can do something for me? And she ended up recommending me to an integrative GP. And this was about 6 or 7 or 8 months after Matthew passed away, and I had started to recover, to a certain degree. I was able to get myself into a bit of a routine where I was able to do most of what I needed to do in the mornings, and then I wasn't able to do anything in the afternoons and evenings. You wouldn't do anything in the evenings. I just, it's really hard throughout that whole process. We lost friends and social outings, and then even with my recovery, I lost friends because I couldn't do things, and it was just, I would make time to make the effort, but then at the time I just couldn't do that social outing. I couldn't meet my friend for lunch, even having someone come over, because I would have to sit there and try and listen and think of what they're saying to me, and that would be really difficult. And there were days when I couldn't even walk Eleanor to school, my daughter, and we lived 2 minutes away from the school. 2 minutes walk, and I would have to sometimes get my dad to come and take my daughter to school 2 minutes down the road, or get a friend or get dad, because my mum at this point was back in Perth, but I did have my dad there and other family, and they were able to help in those periods of time. There was never any consistency, and I still was nowhere near being able to do any work. I was on disability.
Had you heard of chronic fatigue syndrome before, or what did you think when you got that diagnosis?
I had, because my mother has it, and she's had it for 30 years, and she has actually improved in her own health and wellness over the last year through what I have been doing. So, yeah, I would come home from school, in primary school, and Mum would be in bed. That was my life. That was just what happened. So
I'm very sorry to hear that. Yeah, I'm very sorry. And I definitely empathize. I grew up with it as well, and it was a nightmare in our household. So, of course, everyone's situation is different, and I don't know what your journey was like, but I imagine it was very, very difficult. And it's very interesting to me because I had never heard of anyone before who their mother had chronic fatigue syndrome as well. I thought I was some weird kind of anomaly. And then we believe her mother had it also. But now that I'm sharing my story, more and more people are reaching out to me saying, oh my goodness, my mother had it also. I can't believe this.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I don't know. There's something happening there, whether it's a genetic component or something that's passed through childbirth or habits, or something is happening it's happening in families sometimes.
It is. I'm becoming more aware of what it can be, and just through discussions with my mum and from the research I've been doing and in my own recovery, finding out what my root cause was as well. Which was the Epstein-Barr virus. My mum describes it as having a virus for 30 years. And if she has a virus that is something that there is no current medical vaccine or cure for, that's something that could be passed through to me or any of my siblings in childbirth, because it's fluids. It's just like a cold, a virus. And that's what we are basically thinking, that it was through that I got the Epstein-Barr virus, because I grew up all through my childhood. I had constant tonsillitis.
Okay.
constant, and that is one of the earlier signs. I didn't have a terrible glandular fever type bout for 3 weeks. I was just constantly sick with tonsillitis, and then I became unwell with hypothyroidism, which is also linked to Epstein-Barr virus. So this is all stuff that I found out after hindsight, and just through that process, and what I've implemented, and I've helping my mum to implement as well. She has improved. She said, I don't have that terrible fatigue anymore. So I just feel like I'm needing to continue to raise awareness for all these people who are being told that their doctors can't help them, even though they're medical professionals. They should be able to know what's going on with someone who presents to be unwell, because that's what they've studied and that's their life. I get that. But it ends up being that we have to be our own doctors. And there's just research and science and medical community is catching up. I get that. But it ends up being that we have to be our own doctors. We have to fight for ourselves and not stop until we find our answers.
Yeah, well said. And I'm really curious what you thought of your chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis, having been so acutely aware of it, because for me, it felt like a death sentence. I would have taken, I know that there are many worse diagnoses probably in the world, but I would have taken anything else. To me, that was the worst possible scenario to ever happen to me. So did you feel something similar, or what was it like for you hearing that you had what your mother had, what you witnessed all those years?
Oh, look, around the time of the diagnosis, that's when I was still dealing with my husband. So it was probably in the year after that I was coming to terms with that I wasn't able to get myself feeling better. I couldn't get any consistency in my health, and it was the idea of having to deal with this for the rest of my life. It never sat with me. Even with my Hashimoto's, taking a medication for the rest of my life, I didn't like being reliant on that. And that's not to say that you shouldn't do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I just felt like there's got to be something out there that can fix me or help me. My bodies are incredible things. They are able to repair. So there was something missing. I was lots of missing pieces to my puzzle, and I was never able to sit right because my mum was never able to be well and healthy, and it's only in the last few years that she's starting to get herself back out there. She's just managed it. She has most of her things she's doing in the morning, and then she might need a rest, and lately she's having more days where she can go through the day without having a rest, and and even then it's not terrible fatigue. But I was never happy with that idea, that diagnosis, that I would just have to maintain it, because that's what my GP said. There's nothing you can do, you just have to manage your fatigue.
I know that you're fully recovered now, and I actually don't know lots about your story, so I'm very curious. I'm sure everyone is. How did you manage to start turning this around, or did you figure this all out on your own? Did you have some support from somewhere? What did that look like?
Oh, it came from a few factors, and this is where, again, in hindsight, when you're talking to people and hearing about their stories, or they're suggesting things for you, this is where I say, if you haven't tried it before, try it, because it could be your answer. So basically, it started with going to my integrative GP, and she had a bit more insight around chronic fatigue, potential connection with gluten, and so she started me on being gluten-free. I also had a gut biome test, so I had a stool sample taken to check my gut flora, and those results were pretty amazing. My stomach was terribly acidic. I was not absorbing any nutrients. I had an overgrowth of streptococcus, which is linked to cancer and also to Epstein-Barr virus. And because of that overgrowth, she was concerned and wanted me to have a colonoscopy. just to make sure that it hadn't led to anything else. So that was interesting, but I had the colonoscopy and I didn't feel like there was any issues there, but it was can never be too careful. So I had colonoscopy and that all came back fine. There was no signs of any abnormal cells. But I needed to treat this overgrowth, which explained all the years that I would get sore throats, overgrowth of strep in my system, constant bacterial infections. I had to reduce that with antibiotics. She put me on 2 weeks of antibiotics, and I had to stop having anything sugary, even fruit, for about 2 months to stop feeding it. So essentially we're trying to starve it. And I started taking other probiotics to build up the rest of my bacteria. So that was probably a really huge step for me to balance out my gut health. And I started to feel a little bit better through that process, and by not eating gluten. I didn't understand why gluten, what that link was, but it seemed to be working, and I was starting to feel a little bit better with each thing that I implemented. But there was still, again, never any consistencies in my health. I was never getting a long enough break to feel like I was well enough to go back to work, for example. But I was chipping away at it. I was starting to ask these questions, and people were starting to provide answers for me. And then my girlfriend was introduced to what we now call redox therapy, or redox signaling molecules, and it was a supplement that she was given by her reflexologist. And she said, look, Tess, you need to try this. I think it could really help you. And at that point, I wasn't really doing anything else. So it was just before I'd seen my integrative GP, and I hadn't yet had my gut health done. So that was a bit around the other way. But so I started taking this liquid supplement, these redox signaling molecules, and wasn't really able to do anything else. I was still just going about my day-to-day. And I felt like I went through 4 months of having a cold every day. Like every day I was runny nose, sniffling. I kept talking to my girlfriend about it, and she said, look, you're going through a detox. It's part of helping your body to signal better, and so therefore it functions better, and it can start to target anything that might be going on in me. And so I persevered, and after about 4 months of feeling like I had a cold every day, even more so than just a virus, like it was full on runny nose and sinus and everything, the runny nose stopped after about 4 months, and I started to feel like I wasn't needing to get help with taking my daughter to school. I had more energy to take my daughter to school. I was able to think a bit clearer around having the meals that I needed to make and prepare for Eleanor. I was still, needing rest, but I felt like there were little bits of light at the end of the tunnel after being so unwell for so long. And I also went back to my doctor to have a thyroid blood test again. I had them regularly, and I had to have a reduction in my thyroid meds because I was taking too much. So there were some really cool little changes that happened just from this supplement, and so I kept taking that, and then I was able to talk with my integrative GP and my gut health, balance that out, and I stopped having the gluten, and it was progressively getting better in increments. And at this point I was about 50% recovered, maybe 60% recovered in overall health. There were bits that came better than others, like my clarity would be really good one day and then not so good the next, but often it would just be really terrible. So after that it became like, right, there are things out there that are helping, and I'm still not quite there yet, but maybe I'll just keep chipping away and keep researching. And it was about a year after that my girlfriend gave me the book Medical Medium by Anthony William, And I've seen a few people talk about Anthony William, and my sister mentioned him a year before, and I was not in the brain space to really think about that. But she gave me this book, and she said, look, he's talking about chronic fatigue and what could be causing it and how you can help yourself. And I read this book and I thought, oh my God, this guy's actually saying that I could possibly heal myself and get better. And all he was suggesting was to take out certain foods that might be triggering any viral cells, especially if my cause was Epstein-Barr virus, that might be triggering that. Starve the virus and then just eat clean, lower my toxic load, get rid of heavy metals, get rid of pesticides and insecticides exposure, because my hormones were terrible at this point as well. Like throughout the whole time, my hormones, my periods were terrible, my skin was terrible, breaking out, I had eczema. So these were all things that were going on throughout being unwell. And hormones, stress hormones, adrenal hormones, women's hormones, they all apparently contributed to feeding this virus. And if it wasn't dealt with, then you would progressively get worse. And so I just thought, okay, wow, this could really be it. This could be my solution. And he basically had a 3-month thyroid healing cleanse that I did because I also had Hashimoto's. And so I did that. I took out eggs, dairy, gluten, soy, corn and canola. And that in itself was a lot because I spent about 2 weeks preparing for it because it was a lot. I had to think about what I was going to eat by not having all of these things. And then, and then have the energy to actually to make and prepare these things because I was making everything fresh and I was not having any additives, preservatives, food colorings. I was taking everything out. After about 3 months, I was again feeling a bit better. I was having celery juice. I don't know if you've heard about that, but I've had celery juice every morning, which really helped my gut balance, especially taking out dairy. Dairy was a huge thing for my gut. And after about 6 months, I finished the 3-month cleanse and I thought, I'm going to keep going with it. And then after about 6 months, I was just walking around one day thinking, I haven't had a nap or needed a nap for quite a few weeks. And I was like, oh my God, like I might lie down and watch and have a movie or something, but I didn't need a sleep. And that was 6 months after I made that choice to change what I ate to target a potential virus in my system, starve it out, and then start to repair the rest of my body and allow my body to do that as well. And I was like, oh my God, it really is, it works, it can work. So it was just like mind-blowing, really.
That is incredible.
Diet, nutrition, lowering your toxic load, knowing what I was targeting and treating though, that was the thing. And what triggered that. That really gave me my power back to control my health. And that's part of what I teach now, because there's so many people in the world that seem to have the Epstein-Barr virus or scarlet fever or these other terrible viruses, and then they become chronically ill from it. And so it's like basically like, wow, if this has worked for me, I need to tell people that it could work for them too. And I could actually support them to do that because I know how hard it was for me to do it. I didn't know anyone else who had recovered from chronic fatigue. My mum was still sick with it. So I didn't know anyone else. I was doing it all on my own, aside from my family. There was no one else doing it with me. And it was really hard, really, really hard. And so I thought, if I can make this process easier for someone else and it works for them, I have to support them through that and be an inspiration and be, I don't like the word motivation, I prefer the word inspiration. Because motivation is like, even that makes me feel tired. Yeah, so it
Oh,
just
that's
went
really
from
great, Teresa.
there.
I'm so happy for you. This is incredible that you were able to get past this, and I really commend you for, having to keep at it and keep looking and having that sort of determination to like, there's answers out there. I love that.
There
Like things
are,
are
yes,
helping. What else
yes,
could help me? Like keep trying. And I don't
yep,
think we ever fail by trying things. Some things don't work, but then we learn from it. I'm like, okay, that wasn't for me, or you take something away from it and then you try something else. So that is
exactly.
really amazing.
Yep,
Really amazing.
exactly.
And
Never
you've
give up.
taught, yeah, yeah, which can be tough. And I think maybe we all have moments or days where we sort of
Oh,
give up, and that's okay. But just not to get stuck there and to keep finding those ways to, to keep. I mean, I
yes.
think that's why you and I both share a lot of our own story. And a lot of people tell me that the biggest thing that they get from my channel is hope. And I think that's what it is. Like people just need that fuel so that they can
Yes.
keep going and keep searching for their answer, because you need something to keep you going, because it can be a nightmare.
Yes,
But
it
there
can.
are things that help. There are things that help. You've talked, you talked about lowering your toxic load, and I was wondering if you have any tips or suggestions on ways to do that in your life, whether it be with diet or outside of diet, like products or just different things that you do.
Oh, absolutely. So there are five, so part of my natural wellness coaching and what I've learned over through my own recovery and a lot of research that I've done myself is that there are five pillars and a foundation to overall health, and they are cellular support, hydration, nutrition, and low tox household. So they're both the same.
Mm,
Mental wellness, movement, and sleep. And so I look at each of those pillars and look at ways in which you might be exposed to any sort of toxin or chemical or heavy metals or insecticides or pesticides, any toxic load in those areas. So, for example, clean filtered water so that you're not having chlorine. That
mm,
is really can be quite a huge thing for someone. It can be their answer, especially if chlorine is feeding their chronic fatigue.
mm-hmm,
They go swimming at a saltwater pool instead of a chlorine pool. So get rid of your chlorine. It's there to kill bacteria in the pipes, but it for people who are dealing with some sort of viral load,
mm-hmm,
chlorine is not good. It can feed and you'll be hydrated, but you're not helping your body rest or recover. And these are just little things, little changes, but they can help. With your nutrition, especially if you have some sort of viral load, like I highly recommend everything that I gave up, and it wasn't forever either. Like
mm,
I now eat cheese and enjoy a bit of cheese in moderation. So now that I'm well and recovered, and I'm balancing that, so it's a balance. But initially, when you're recovering, get rid of the eggs and dairy and soy and the gluten, because those are genetically modified products that deal with hormones.
mm,
They're virus feeding foods that will contribute to any sort of inflammation. They contribute to an acidic tummy and you get the bloating, all of that. So highly recommend just getting rid of those foods. And the other way is looking at some products. So there are ingredients out there that are more harmful than others, and some even natural. So yes, people have allergies. They can have allergies to peanuts, and these things are natural. But anything that's artificial, so any artificial flavors or colors, sulfates, sodium lauryl sulfate is a big cause of eczema and skin issues and fatigue and gut issues.
mm.
Parabens, there's a lot of products now that are paraben free, which is great. Slowly starting to get more awareness around the issue with parabens. Aluminium deodorants, so get rid of the aluminium out of your deodorants, aluminium free deodorants, because it's a heavy metal. Heavy metals in themselves provide a huge amount of brain fog and memory issues and fatigue, and we all have some sort of heavy metal load just through our own environment, through cars and driving, and carbon dioxide, and through insecticides and pesticides, through eating organic foods over fresh foods, but if you can't, make sure you wash your foods with, clean soapy water. Soak it for 15 minutes in bicarb soda. So, you can make improvements, little improvements, and you only need to make one at a time. I did it all at once. I was just ready to go. But just making one improvement at a time is all you need to do to start reducing your toxic load. And that just basically, it just means reducing things that can be aggravating your body and preventing you from feeling better. Anyone who is unwell, they have free radicals in their body that can be in the form of the heavy metals, viral cells, our natural free radicals that our body produces, and cancer cells, anything that is what they regard as like an oxidative stress in our bloodstream. But we balance that out with antioxidants. So what we're trying to do is reduce this balance of free radicals and bring it back up to the antioxidants. The antioxidants are what helps our body to fight for us, to build up a strong immune system. And so if we can get this down by reducing anything that could be contributing, any toxic load that could be contributing to bring this back up, it's about finding a balance. So that's what my biggest thing is I can say for anybody is it's not about finding the perfect cure or result, it's finding your balanced wellness, and it can come in different ways and forms, and that's part of what I help people to look outside the square and find and try different things to see what works for them.
Those are great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I like your suggestion or idea that you just have to do one at a time, because I think sometimes it can all feel so overwhelming, depending on where you are in your life. Sometimes you're ready to take on a whole bunch at once, but other times there's the thought of it makes you shut down, and you think, why even try? I'm not even going to bother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be overwhelming. And that's part of what I fucking help people to remind. Just making one change is all you need to do, and then get used to that one change, and then try and implement something else. And the other thing is chemicals and cleaning around your house. So there are a lot of natural alternatives now to be able to clean. As simple as, white vinegar and water is a great cleaner for the bathroom, and it's non-toxic, low tox. So just having an awareness is the first step.
Good tip. I'm wondering as well, I would really love to hear, and I'm sure people watching would as well, because you went through all of your health challenges while you had a child, and lots of parents, also are facing this. So do you have any, insights from your journey or suggestions on how to manage this with a child, or what was that like for you?
Oh, well, I did have amazing family support when I needed it, especially my mum. But it was important that I laid down a strong boundaries for my daughter, so that when I wasn't right, she wouldn't go off the deep end. And it took a long time to learn that, and it took a lot of strength and energy to put those boundaries in place, because as long as she felt safe and secure, she was good and well. We had a lot of issues with separation anxiety, and a lot of issues where she would probably feel when I'm not right and I'm anxious, or when I was tired or unwell. And so she's not feeling safe and secure herself because mummy's not right. So she's wanting more of my attention. And it became a bit of a vicious cycle, but we eventually were able to help her. Once I realised that those boundaries needed to be in place, and all children's boundaries are different. My daughter needed to feel, she needed to know exactly what the ground rules were. So there was no arguing with mum. You do not argue with mum, because there's no time or energy to argue with mum, and no one wins. I mean, at that point in time, she was from 3 to 5, and now she's 11. But I will say that the more you can teach them, and it shouldn't be this way, but the more you can teach them to be independent, and the more you can teach them to do little things that they can do as they grow older, it does end up being a bit of a blessing in disguise. So my daughter became quite independent at a young age through necessity. And so there's nothing that I really need to do for her now other than make sure that she's safe and well and loved, because she's making her own lunches, and, you know, she's going, you know, takes herself to the bath and shower and all that kind of thing. I'm there just to do the reminders. But even when she was 5 or 6 or 7, you know, I had to rely on my little girl to go and get me a drink of water, and you don't ever want to do that. But at the end of the day, they're your children. They love you unconditionally. So just be okay. That's probably my only advice, is to not worry about your kids. Put in a firm boundary line. Sit down with them and tell them why. Because mummy's sick, mummy's unwell, I can't do this. If they have an understanding, as opposed to just saying, no, you can't do this. If you sit down with them and explain to them why and how it might affect you, that it seems to come across a bit easier and a bit more to understand. You know, like with anything, if you tell them to eat vegetables, they, you know, no, I don't want to eat vegetables, it's disgusting. But I found the more I sit down, the more I've learnt about food and all the different beautiful fresh foods and fruits and vegetables and what they do and how they help the body. My daughter's now absorbing all of that information, and she now learns about, you know, bananas and broccoli and all of those things and how they help. So I guess that's my advice, is just to, it's okay if you're sick and tired, and it's okay if your child has a tantrum and you go off into bed and put the covers over your head. Your child will be all right for 10 or 15 minutes while you take a moment for yourself. But the more you can sit down and talk to them and give them an understanding of what's going on, the easier it is for them to understand. And, you know, it's life lessons. It's all stuff that they will be able to take away and use themselves, all these tools, even though they shouldn't have to.
Yeah, I love that something really good came out of all of this. And I think thank you for sharing that, because I think that's an important message to get out there, because understandably, I'm sure parents worry a lot about the effect this is having on their children, and, you know, the time and the energy that they don't have to do the things that they want to do. But I think, you know, as you said, kids only know what they know. Their normal is normal. And, you know, getting them to learn some independence a little bit earlier, you know, to a reasonable amount, of course. We're not talking about leaving them to fend for themselves, but it's great that she built that up, and some really good things have come out of this.
Yes, there have been some really good things. She also needed counselling as well throughout the whole process, which is very understandable. But it meant that when she wasn't right, I could be there for her, and vice versa. But you know, you will never probably get rid of that mummy guilt. I still get that, even though I'm well and healthy. There are still days that I can't be, you know, when you just can't be bothered. So you know, that's part of the norm now. But it's not, you're so tired that you just can't even think about giving your daughter a kiss and they have to come to you. That's okay.
That is the other thing I hear as well, that all parents, whether they're sick or healthy, have this level of guilt, like they're not doing it all or they're not doing it enough. So it's not, of course, it's more difficult when you're facing health challenges, but it's something that all parents are going to face. And no matter what, it's going to feel like you should be doing something better or more or different.
Messy is better than perfect, and there is no perfect. No one is perfect.
Yeah,
Nothing.
so true. I like the boundaries and the counseling as well. I think as much, especially when kids are younger, to protect them from this as much as you can is good. And then giving that extra support through counseling, I think that's amazing. Good for you for doing that.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of people who recommended that, you know, it was just listening to people and going places that seemed to be the best places. And when there was support, when there was funding to look after Eleanor and I and for Matthew, you know, don't try and do everything yourself is another suggestion I would say. If there is help, someone's offering the help, take it. It is not a sign of weakness. Yeah. It is a sign of respite and rest, and that someone is caring enough to ask for help.
Well, I'm so appreciative of you for sharing this. This is quite the journey you've been on. You've been, you know, through more than anyone should have to go through, you and your husband and your daughter. I'm happy that you guys have come through and you're strong and you're healthy, and Always as we sort of wrap these up, I like to ask people if there's any other insights or suggestions or tips you would have for people, or, advice you'd have for yourself if you could go back. Just anything else you'd like to share with people who are currently facing this and, trying to get through it.
One of my big things is I always reiterate, and it comes a bit with hope, but you might be given a diagnosis, and this person that's giving you this diagnosis might be a professional, but that doesn't mean that that's the be-all and end-all. You still don't have to accept that if something doesn't sit right for you. And the way that things are in this world, the more modern we become, more technology, more research, just because there might not be something right now for you doesn't mean there may not be tomorrow or in a month's time or in a year's time, or that there isn't someone out there that's been through exactly what you've been through and come out the other side. So I would say this to anyone with any diagnosis, even ones that seem like they are death sentences. Like even with Matthew, we had an amount of realism with that, but we still never gave up trying to find ways to help him and to maximise his life while we had him. And unfortunately, it wasn't in his lifetime that we found a cure. There's starting to become more information about dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that now, but especially with chronic fatigue, if you know what caused it, if you know your root cause, that gives you a huge advantage to be able to find some sort of treatment, especially if someone else with that root cause has recovered.
Yeah, I think it's an important message. And people all over the world are fully recovering from things that are said to be incurable. So I don't think that it's ever hopeless for anybody, no matter what you're facing. There's always a chance. There's always a reason to try and to keep searching. And yeah, it's interesting about the root cause. Some people seem to find that helpful and then others not. But I think it's an important thing to look at and see if there's a way you can use that to help your recovery. So,
absolutely. It wasn't until I knew what I was trying to treat by treating, because at that time with any of us, we're just treating symptoms. And that's not going to, it might relieve that symptom, but the root cause is still in there simmering away. So it really did help me hugely. But again, it wasn't until friends mention or suggest these things. You know. And the other thing that I found really amazing after the fact to help with my thyroid issues once I was fully recovered from chronic fatigue was energetic medicine and kinesiology. Highly recommend if you know a great kinesiologist or someone dealing with energetic medicine. It's been around for years and years, but it was through my energetic medicine man who was able to really pinpoint a lot of other issues that were going on with me that he was able to balance out. And it's all dealing with energy, and it's something that I've never heard of before that. And again, I was just like, I'm going to give it a try. Can't hurt to try. And I'm so glad that I did. So.
And it does, even though there's different paths out of this for different people, I still hear common themes. And I hear, from what I'm hearing from your story, I hear it as well. It's a lot of what you're doing is just to work with your body and support its ability to take care of itself. Like, this is what we're doing. We're just supporting that ability to heal. And what everyone needs for that might be a little bit different, but exactly.
Every single body has the ability to heal, but in this day and age, our bodies and our cells can get overloaded, and if we don't know what's causing that overload and that imbalance, because again it always comes back to that imbalance, then our bodies can't. Our bodies are trying so hard to fight for ourselves. Our immune system, our liver, everything. They're trying so hard, but it's just. Unfortunately, with processed foods, oh my gosh, to go into processed foods is just all of this. We just need to get back to being natural, like our body is at the end of the day. That's why I'm called natural wellness coach. I'm finding that the more natural we're able to live, without any extra crap, the better our body can respond and heal. At the end of the day.
So if people want to learn more about what you do or about your natural wellness coaching that you do, where can they do that? Where can they find information? How can they reach you?
Oh, well, I've got a couple of different areas. So from chronictocure.com is my website. And that started by when I started doing my medical medium nutrition. I started a blog because I wanted to be accountable to not just me, but to the world. And I thought, if this works, I want to have a blog, something to record the process. So that's where I thought, right, at the time it was just a concept, from chronic to cured. I wasn't cured, but it's the concept. So that's where that came from, and I've stuck with it, from chronic to cured.com.
I like it.
On Instagram, it's Chronic to Cured with Terese, and I'm also on Facebook from Chronic to Cured as well. So I would love to hear from anybody who wants to share their story or would like to make a time that I can perhaps then see if we can help each other. So
that's amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that. And of course, all of this will be in the video description for anyone who wants to find it. And I'm sure, Terese, you would be happy to answer questions here on the video as well if people want to leave comments.
Absolutely.
And ask questions. Well, this is amazing. I cannot thank you enough. I really just, these stories to me are like pure gold. When I hear of people who have, mostly or fully recovered, I'm just so excited to get those stories out, because I just know it's so important. Virtually everyone I talk to who's fully recovered, myself included, has said, I hadn't heard of anyone else who had recovered. I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know how to do it. So I thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do this, and for all the amazing work that you do to support people now that you're past it. I think it's so important and so incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Raelan.
And to people watching, there are many other people who have recovered. I'll link on the screen above here somewhere a playlist that has many other ME, CFS, full recovery stories. So for the people that are watching, I know there's a lot of people that are still in it, that are still really struggling, and things can feel hopeless and impossible, but good for you for keeping at it, for watching these videos. And if this video didn't have your answers, maybe something else out there will. So just keep at it. There's hope. There's hope for you too. So thank you to everyone watching. Thank you again, Terese. And that's all for today.